Hello and welcome to The Autistic Me. I'm Christopher Scott Wyatt. And today for the podcast, we are being joined by State Representative Dan Miller outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Could you explain which region of Allegheny County you represent?
Sure, and good afternoon. So I represent the 42nd District of the Commonwealth here. We are based in Mount Lebanon, but we also include the communities of Dormont, Castle Shannon, Baldwin Township, a little bit of the city of Pittsburgh and Brookline, and a little bit of Scott.
You cover an area which might be called a suburb of central Pittsburgh.
We are overwhelmingly a suburban district.
You have a very passionate outlook on individuals with disabilities and how local and state government can help those individuals.
You know, we've been lucky over my roughly 5 years in office to form a coalition of government staff and employees and so forth, nonprofits, but also families throughout the area to help sort of advance and bring spotlights to several issues broadly relating to the disability community.
And how did you get involved in advocating for legislation and resolutions that support the disability community?
I always knew that when I was elected in a special election in 2013 and on the campaign trail, I often talked about my concern regarding what I was seeing to be a sort of lack of focus from the state in relation to disability and mental health issues. So I always knew that it'd be something that we would get into. I asked to be on some committees that relate to this area, so we always anticipated it. However, what we didn't really get was how deep the need and the concern and the issues are. And so it has definitely has maintained to be our number one issue and concern that we talk about. I would definitely say that the vast majority of legislation I draft and work that we spend as a state rep has been in the disability and mental health arena. We always knew it would be there, but now we know we can't leave.
One of the things that I have encountered as a parent and as an activist is resistance at the state and local level, which is responsible for most funding and most implementation of federal mandates, a hesitancy to follow those dictates or at least the spirit of law, and instead they'll adhere to the letter of the law, and even sometimes possibly skirt that. How can the state better implement some of the dictates from the federal courts and also federal legislation? How can we better serve our local communities?
You know, I've been very optimistic and thankful for several of Governor Wolf's efforts in this arena. So much, as you said, is tied to some federal restraints and federal dictates, many of which are good. The reality of it is, though, too, is in order for most of these things to work, we need to have secured funding in place. That continues to be a problem in every aspect of this, whether it's talking to 13,000 people on an ID waiting list or whether it's talking to several hundred Pennsylvanians who are deafblind. The reality of it is that we have some very nice ideas on paper, but we are still struggling to marshal the resources that it takes to bring those good ideas to fruition.
One of the things I notice in Pennsylvania and other states where I have done work as a consultant is that they are reliant on local funding, which causes disparities because when you rely on local tax bases, the areas that need the most supports have the smallest tax base.
There's a case, actually, that I'm trying to keep an eye on now that's going through the courts that is not solely focused on special education, but is just education in general. And unlike the federal Constitution, our state constitution here in Pennsylvania does have pretty clear requirements as to what the state's responsibility is in making sure we have an appropriate public education system here. We all realize that there is some degree of discrepancy between our school districts, no matter what. Okay, so everybody accepts that to a degree of truth. Now, whether or not it should be, or whether or not the gap has gotten too big, those are, of course, real questions for people to talk about. The problem is that when you have gaps in funding, especially for populations that have atypical challenges, those gaps are magnified. And that very much is where special education, as I'm sure you know, falls into. You know, you could take a child, we have several great school districts in my area here, Mount Lebanon being one of them, but you could take a child to Mount Lebanon with a certain diagnosis and be able to walk out the door in 20 minutes with A, B, and C in relation to supports. But you could take that same child with the same supportive documentation and go to other areas of Western PA, and you can't get A because A doesn't exist.
And when you take a look at how the state of Pennsylvania does funding, which is similar to the majority of states, schools and sometimes healthcare districts are funded off the local property taxes. And that is, in effect, a magnifier of the disparity.
And that's where state funding is supposed to help as well. So, yes, there's no doubt that we have different tax bases across our state. Pennsylvania, 12.7 million, credible geographic diversity as well to deal with. There's no doubt that we have discrepancies in property values. But again, that's where, Governor Wolf in particular had been trying to push with this new basic education funding formula. The problem is in some of the changes we have done for basic and special education, those, I would say, more positive, equitable changes are only applicable to new money going into the system. So we're still based off what, in my opinion, had been for the previous administration, a poor plan in relation to education funding, which had led to great discrepancies across the board.
One of the challenges that I see is offsetting the lack of funding at the state level or the local level with charities. You have brought together a disability summit on an annual basis that has attracted a number of special needs service providers, training centers, and others. Could you talk about how you decided to do this disability summit and its very successful history here in the greater Pittsburgh region?
Sure. I went to a forum I guess maybe 10 years ago or a little bit more now in Penn State. Very nice and informative. And I took a look at the event. While it was great, I noticed a couple things for it. One is, of course, it's in Penn State, which can be challenging for many people. This included cost, included childcare arrangements, and so forth. And I said, we need to do something better. We need to bring something like this home. So when the opportunity came up, and my office in particular, we pride ourselves on doing a myriad of events every year. But I said, let's create this disability summit here. Let's be sure to do it in a way that keeps it local, keeps it free, keeps it open to everyone. So we worked off of that sort of initial direction. And our first summit was maybe 6 or 7 hours long, nice event. And we had a couple hundred people there, maybe 200 people. 2 years ago, which was our biggest summit, we had 3 days worth of events, 1,300 people at it. And it got so overwhelming that my staff, we couldn't keep up with it. So we're back to our typical now 2-day format, which is what we just completed this year. Somewhere a little bit shy of 1,000 people over the 2 days walk into the facility. And yes, we pride ourselves as well in offering what I think is the largest collection of disability resources in Western PA.
And this, to me, demonstrates that government and private organizations can collaborate to inform parents and support providers of what's available and their rights.
6 months roughly before the summit, which is in every March, maybe 8 months before the summit, we start our planning committee meetings. And at that table, if you were to come, you'd find local school directors, school district personnel. You would find nonprofits. You'd find hospitals. You'd find parents, and you'd find self-advocates. And what we do for roughly 6 months anyhow is we plan new topics, new sessions that we bring up. So obviously there are some topics that are pretty universal. We try to cater to both those who are new to a diagnosis and those who have lived through 20 years and are concerned perhaps about what comes next type of thing. So, but we put together everybody equal at a table. And for 6 months, we debate topics and come up with experts on each one.
I noticed that your legislative push often reflects some of the content in current and past disability summits. Do you leave those summits then with ideas that you want to take to the State House?
One way or the other, the summits either are used to either generate new ideas or the summit is a way for us to showcase current ones. So, for example, this past summit, we do a legislative panel that always close out the event. I'm very proud of it. It's always a great time. I have a dozen or so legislators, elected officials, Democrats, Republicans, state senators, representatives, Congressman Lamb, for example, was there. So wide diversity at the panel. We spent an hour talking about deaf-blind issues. Well, this was an issue that we were aware of beforehand, before the summit. We had met with deafblind Pennsylvanians and some advocates. We had the framework for where we wanted to go, and then we used the summit to further educate ourselves, but also provide an opportunity for other elected officials to become familiar with the issue. So that way, when we brought the bill, which we did last month, to Harrisburg and to the committee, there was already amongst some a basic understanding of what our legislation was attempting to do and why. So yes, the summit, one way or the other, every cycle, every year, does inform us and help us in advancing, or at least trying to advance legislation.
I'd like to shift gears slightly. One of the things that has interested me is possible legal reforms for individuals with disabilities who are stuck in a legal system. You have been involved in reforming some of the legal system treatments of juveniles, especially who make mistakes and might need alternative approaches instead of just a conviction and a jail sentence.
There's been a variety of things that we've been active on a bit with that. I, in a past life, was a juvenile public defender here in Allegheny County. I have a pretty good knowledge of the system, what works and sometimes what doesn't work. Obviously, in particular for the points of this discussion here, we are aware of the amount of kids who are getting brought into the system with a diagnosis of some type, and the unique challenges that often brings, where some of the bottlenecks of the system are in helping to address the child's needs in a positive way. So I still largely am very concerned that our juvenile system, despite the effort of some very good judges, some very good district attorneys and public defenders in particular, do not have the resources available to always do what can be done. And on the other side of that as well, kids with disabilities and mental health issues are disproportionately in the juvenile justice system. And that is a whole other set of problems that we need to talk about, especially as we look to increase the number of police who are in schools.
So we have an issue where disabilities often lead to children in the foster care system. Sometimes they can be mental health issues. Sometimes they can be abuse issues, neglect. But obviously, a young teenager with special needs is a vulnerable individual entering a system that's an extremely complex system. How do we start explaining to judges mental health and juvenile needs when a lot of people don't think about mental health and mental disabilities among the juvenile population?
I have known many kids' voice attorneys and some great ones as well. Obviously, here in Allegheny County, we're much larger than most counties. We have several judges who are assigned to both delinquency and dependency issues here. And there is a certain expertise that comes both from their side, but also with certain DAs and PDs and so forth, kids' voice attorneys who are assigned to that population in particular. Yeah, I still think that we're struggling. You mentioned the mental health. We're struggling, I think, on the mental health side to still wrap our hands around what in essence would be an early intervention initiative, a program for mental health. And what I mean is nowadays, if you have a child born with autism, basically, especially here in Pennsylvania, but almost everywhere that I'm aware of, the chances are by between 18 and 36 months, your child is going to be diagnosed to some degree and be offered some degree of services. And again, I recognize not every state is the same. But here in Pennsylvania, that is going to be the case. So we have seen that early intervention in relation to some disabilities have clear, measurable, sustainable benefits. We still struggle on the mental health side with that. We have a bill, for example, that would right now, if you have a child in the state of Pennsylvania, your child is going to go to school, and during their time, they're going to get a vision, a hearing, a scoliosis, a physical, all these types of medical checks in relation to their physical health. But there is nothing that even asks a question regarding a child's mental health. So what has become pretty standardized, partially from one of the successes of the Affordable Care Act, was to push in mental health services. But in relation to depression screens, right now we know that half of lifetime mental illnesses can be diagnosed by the time you're 14 years old. And we know that depression screens can be a very valuable tool, even in a young age, in sort of red flagging some issues. So we have a bill that would say that as of sixth grade, for sixth grade and 11th grade, when you go to bring your child to the physical, one of the questions you will be asked by your pediatrician would be, do you want your child to have a depression screen? And obviously that will start a conversation as to its value and hopefully why it's important for all children to do. So the point about a bill like this is we want to get ahead of the curve. We want to identify issues. And again, on mental health, undiagnosed and untreated mental health issues raises a whole variety of problems. So we want to get ahead of the curve for it, and hopefully in a way too that is sort of erasing stigma that attaches. It does us. I would much rather look to help a child. If you have a child, would you rather miss the fact that your kid had a cavity for 18 months in a back molar and you didn't know it? Or would you rather miss the fact that your kid had a depressive episode and could not get out of it for 18 months and you didn't know it? So I think most people would go with the idea that we have to do better with mental health.
And is there a personal connection to these issues for you, or have you just met enough constituents and individuals that you feel obligated as a member of the community to speak out?
You know, I think every family, especially in relation to mental health, but I think every family has some connection to some diagnosis. So I think that's basically always the case. But I would also say that while I appreciate being one of the perhaps more prominent advocates in the floor of the House, there are others, and there are others on both sides of the aisle, like my friend Representative Tom Mert, Republican out in Philadelphia. I've learned a lot. When we say diagnosis and disability, these are massive terms. Somebody may know a bit about one, doesn't mean they know a bit about all. And as you know, you've met one person with a diagnosis, you've met one person with a diagnosis. So there's still a lot there.
It is so rare that we have a politician paying attention to disabilities and special needs. Do you think that more politicians will start paying attention as we start accepting mental health issues, physical disabilities? Do you think more politicians will understand that we are a voting bloc and we are concerned citizens?
The reality still is that most families with a loved one with a disability, especially when that loved one is young, they're hanging on by a thin thread. And that usually means two things. It means one, they appreciate the smallest help that makes a day go better, that makes a concern less, and makes them think more positive about the future. The other problem or the other issue that I think attaches to that is a lot of people, a lot of families with disabilities are struggling to find the time to connect with their elected officials. As certain things become easier, hopefully, and as kids age and hopefully people with disabilities themselves become great advocates, we need everybody to spend more and more time in talking to their legislators, both on the state and the federal side. And I've been trying to say this, that, you know, if you have an IEP meeting, then every time you have an IEP meeting, send an email to every one of your legislators. So like most people are like, well, what's a reminder? How can I remember? So if you think about it, look, when we move back the clock, what do? You change your batteries, right? On your smoke alarm. When you have an IEP, send an email to your legislators and let them know that special education funding matters, that you want to be sure that people with disabilities can get a job after they graduate high school and college. You know, let them know that having a full access to SSP services as a deaf-blind Pennsylvanian is an important, essential program that we have to have, that you don't want to see cuts in Medicaid, or anything along those lines. It could be a short email, but and it shouldn't just be from the nuclear family. What we need to do for people who are concerned about disability and mental health issues is we need to expand beyond that, and we need to pull in your cousins, your friends, and family. Everybody who cares about a person with a disability or a diagnosis of any type needs to reach out to their legislators to let them know what's important. So we're getting better. I've been hearing more, but people don't, perhaps in some ways I don't need to hear more. Perhaps we need to have that voice magnified across the state.
I want to thank Representative Dan Miller of the 42nd District of the Pennsylvania House for talking to the Autistic Me and mentioning how important it is that we inform our legislatures of the important value of autistic individuals, other individuals with disabilities, the fact that we are voters, that our parents are voters, that our families are voters. We need to be heard and we need to be listened to. So I thank Representative Dan Miller for speaking on this important issue on the Autistic Me.